Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Katie Jennifer. Katie is a licensed attorney from North Carolina, and she's the proud parent of two queer children. When their youngest daughter, who is transgender, transitioned in 2013, her family immediately began to face obstacles where they felt like having a legal advocate would be beneficial. So after North Carolina passed HB2 in 2016, Katie and her family decided that she should go back to school to become that legal advocate. Now she is a resource for other parents of queer, trans, non-binary kids. Katie spearheads a name and gender marker correction clinic. She co-chairs the Pro Bono and Community Engagement Subcommittee of the North Carolina Bar Association's Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Committee. Katie is secretary of the North Carolina Pauli Murray LGBTQ Bar Association, and she also serves on the board of Conversion Therapy Dropout Network. Katie began her latest role as policy director at Equality NC in July of this year, where she advocates for LGBTQ+ liberation for all North Carolinians. And I'm going to pass it over to Katie.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me here today, Michelle and Suzanne, and the folks at the NCBA for all the help you've given today to make today happen. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. And if somebody can just give me a shout out that you can see. Can folks see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so today I'm going to talk about how the recent legislative changes in North Carolina affect transgender youth. And I appreciate you all having me here today. So what to expect from our time together, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got here, then the impact of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation on trans and non-binary children, a broad overview, and then what are the new laws in North Carolina, next steps and resources, and then hopefully at the end we'll have time for some questions and answers. So how did I get here? So this is a picture of two of my children. On the left is Maddie, in the center is Grace, my oldest, and then on the right is a good family friend, one of those good family friends where you kind of raise your children together. And so these were my kids when they were very little. Maddie, when she was little, we could, my spouse and I saw very early at the age of 2 even, just some things that seemed different than how her sister was at that same age. Maddie was obsessed with high heel shoes, for instance, and even her Sunday school teacher in the 2-year-old class would immediately take off her high heel shoes as soon as Maddie would come in because she'd immediately want to put them on and walk around the room. And then when Maddie was old enough to verbalize who she is, she told me who she was at age 4. At that point, we knew that we were going to need some assistance because we weren't sure how to parent a child that was experiencing any kind of issues with their gender identity. And at the time, we were in Cumberland County, North Carolina, and it was difficult to find a mental health professional that would see a 4-year-old, let alone a 4-year-old who is expressing gender issues. Luckily, we found someone who was willing to learn along with us. And after 2 years of therapy, we all came to the realization that Maddie had been insistent, persistent, and consistent about her gender identity for those 2 years. And so that's when we began the social transition at age 6, which for a lot of trans folks, that's the first step, is a social transition. And it might look like changing your hair, or the kind of clothes you wear, or the name you use, or the pronouns you use. It's different for everybody. And that's one key takeaway I'd like everybody to understand today is there's no one way to be transgender or non-binary. Everybody is different, just as all cis people are different, and we all look a little different, we all act a little different, and that's perfectly fine. And then how we got towards advocacy. So with that social transition, that was in the summer between kindergarten and first grade for Madison. So in kindergarten, she had gone to school using a different name and different pronouns. And then in first grade, she came using her current name, Madison, and she, her pronouns. And so there were some changes that had to be made at school. One of the things was about which bathrooms would she use. We were fortunate in that the school she was in a classroom that had an individual bathroom inside the classroom, so it wasn't an issue right away. Later, it did become an issue. She was not permitted to use the student population bathrooms in the hallway, and if there wasn't a bathroom in her classroom, she was required to use the teachers' restrooms. The principal was very affirming and really supportive of Madison. And so they noticed right away there were some issues in their dress code. She went to what we call in Cumberland County a classical elementary school. It's still a public school, but they wear uniforms. And so there were some issues with the uniform dress code. And so they just took out all the gendered language out of the dress code, which was really helpful. Then later that year, first grade year, Madison was outed by WRAL. They came on campus and started interviewing the parents in the pickup line, most of whom had no clue there was a trans kid at the school, let alone did they know who that kid was. So that sort of took away a lot of our options moving forward and sort of helped propel us towards advocacy because we no longer had the ability to be anonymous. And then after that, Madison had signed up to play Parks and Rec softball. This was for a league that was 8-year-olds and under. We had a good friend who was going to coach, who was supportive. So we knew Madison would be safe on the team. She practiced with the team for about 4 weeks before I got a call the night before the first game saying that their policy would not allow her to play based on the gender marker on her birth certificate. That was one of the times that I reached out to an attorney's office about if we could fight that, and was told at the time, and rightfully so, that it would, potentially take years of work and, thousands of dollars. And that's one of the times that I remember asking the attorney on the phone, what does a regular person do that doesn't have years to wait or thousands of dollars? And that was one of the first times that we started talking about possibly me going back to school to help be a better advocate for Madison. Then following all of that was HB2, and that was sort of the last straw for the family. After HB2, we as a family would take turns going on all the field trips so that Madison's teachers didn't have to determine which bathroom she would use out on a field trip. And so a parent or grandparent would go to all the field trips, and we would just take her to the bathroom every time. And then once I went to law school and started towards becoming an attorney. These are just some of the things that I was able to do. Was a law fellow at the National LGBTQ Task Force in DC. Started the Name and Gender Marker Correction Clinic, which I still head up today. Started volunteering with Equality North Carolina. Became a board member, as Suzanne mentioned, at Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, and then the bars associations that I work with, and then eventually became staff. But what I'm more proud of is the advocacy that Maddie has had. And this is Maddie, this is about a year or so ago, but the photo is, but Maddie is a Gender Equal champion. And if you have access to these slides, anything that's underlined here is a link. So Maddie is part of the Gender Equal champion group that just talk about all the positive things about these wonderful kids. And the least interesting thing about all of them is that they happen to be transgender or non-binary. She's had the opportunity to be part of a couple of different impact litigation strategies, one updating gender markers on North Carolina birth certificates. And then we're on tap for the anti-trans sports law that just went into place. She's also been a volunteer with Equality North Carolina, and she's done a multitude of media. There's an article there in The Guardian from a few years back when the first attempt to outlaw trans folks in sports in North Carolina came about in 2021, I believe it is. And then she just recently did a couple of different speaking engagements with Duke. One was their Sexual and Gender Minority Health Symposium. So I'm super proud parent of this kid. All right, and now let's switch gears to the impact of anti-LGBTQ legislation, sort of a broad overview. So I've got a couple of different graphics here. I'm a visual person, so hopefully these will be helpful to some folks in the audience. So this is just a graphic showing the different types of anti-LGBTQ bills since 2018. So you can see the majority have been religious exemptions, sports restrictions, and school restrictions. And then now we're seeing a lot more in the healthcare restrictions as well. And in North Carolina, we have the three that we are dealing with are the sports and the healthcare and the school. And then this is from the ACLU. They're tracking 501 anti-LGBTQ bills just this year. In the last 2 years, there have been overwhelming introduction of anti-LGBTQ bills across the country. And this just gives you an idea. And you can see North Carolina there. We are in the darkest color. We are in the heaviest load there for this particular map. And then this one is, the big map is for adults, but there is a youth map there, the little tiny one in the corner, and that is the risk assessment map across the US. And you can see for youth, North Carolina is again, the darkest color. For adults, it's still not great. And you can kind of see for youth in the youth map, all the red there. Youth have definitely been under attack, trans youth. A lot of legislation about parents' rights, but not about my right as a parent of a trans kid, about other people's rights for their kids. So you can see there's definitely been a concerted effort targeting trans youth across the US. And then what does this mean for the mental health of LGBTQ people? So I referred here to the Trevor Project's 2023 US National Survey on mental health of LGBTQ young people. And I've linked that in the survey there at the bottom of the slide. So, with the record number of policies and legislation that's been introduced, is definitely having a negative impact on LGBTQ young people's mental health. Even if they're in a state where that is not hostile, just hearing about LGBTQ issues and rights, and hearing a lot of the misinformation, at least for Madison and transgender youth, it's hard and it impacts your mental health. Maddie's 16. She's just out there trying to live her best 16-year-old life with her new driver's license, her new job. She's cheering on the varsity team. She's just trying to be 16. But it gets really hard when you keep hearing people argue about your very right to exist. And then all the rights that folks want to take away from you, things that are available to cis people with no problem, but all of a sudden it's a problem whenever a trans person is accessing it. So it is difficult. So you can see here on the right, different stats that I pulled from that survey. Nearly 1 in 3 LGBTQ young people say their mental health was poor most of the time or always due to these policies and legislation. 2 in 3 said that hearing about this stuff made their mental health a lot worse. But on the opposite end, 79% of these young folks have said that hearing about laws trying to ban conversion therapy made them feel better. So we can see there's a big difference there. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, about positive laws and positive legislation and the impacts of that and supportive folks. So what are the new laws in North Carolina? So first, we're going to look at HB 808. The session law number is there. This is the healthcare bill. So what does HB 808 do? So it prohibits the initiation of any gender affirming care in North Carolina for people under the age of 18. This includes puberty blockers and gender affirming hormone therapy and surgery. So for those in the room who may not be familiar, puberty blockers is a medication that's been used for decades. It was initially, I believe, used for cisgender, and cisgender just means a person who their gender identity aligns with the gender they were assigned at birth. So for cisgender kids who were having precocious puberty, so early onset puberty. So blockers just give a temporary pause on puberty, maybe to let your body or your maturity catch up. So you might have, say, for instance, an 8 or 9-year-old child, cisgender child who's entering puberty, and that's a little too early for them. So a parent might opt with a medical team, and the child also might opt to use puberty blockers as a method to postpone puberty. And again, this is still available for cis kids, just not for trans kids in North Carolina. Gender affirming hormone therapy is not as prevalent as being used for trans kids as blockers, but some kids do use gender affirming hormone therapy at a certain point in that child's medical transition, with a parent along with the medical team, mental health team, and the child might determine that puberty, that gender affirming hormone therapy might be the next step, and they might start with a low dose of either testosterone or estrogen, depending on the child, and that just helps them go through the gender affirming puberty. And then surgery is very rare for minors anywhere in the country. And typically surgery is only indicated for folks who have very serious body dysmorphia. And it's only ever top surgery for trans boys or non-binary folks. So those, just wanted to define those kind of terms and issues. The next thing there is that the bill also prohibits states' funds from being used directly or indirectly towards gender affirming care, and it prohibits Medicaid from covering these issues. And the date on this was August 1st. What it does not do, it doesn't restrict care for youth who began a course of treatment. It's the language from the law, the bill, before August 1st. So if a trans or non-binary youth had begun a course of treatment before then, they are allowed to continue, which is a good thing. We have seen in other states where folks are just denied care no matter where they are in care. So for some kids, they have to come off of their medications, and it might be they might not have ever gone through whatever their natal puberty is, and then coming off of that medication might force them to go through their natal puberty or detransition, which can be devastating and, quite frankly, life-threatening to a trans person. It doesn't prohibit gender affirming care for anyone over the age of 18, and it doesn't prohibit the state employees health plan from covering this kind of care. That's due to a case that's currently in the court. It was just argued a week or so ago at the appellate level in the Fourth Circuit. And so we're still waiting for the outcome of that case. It doesn't prohibit minors from receiving care from outside of North Carolina. We have seen in other states where they are prohibiting youth from traveling across state borders to receive care. North Carolina did not do that. And it doesn't restrict affirming mental health care for trans or non-binary minors. This is a new update to this. A new lawsuit was just filed last week on October 11th by Lambda Legal, the National Health Law Program, and these other local firms. I've linked to the Lambda Legal's case page there. It's Vove versus Mansfield. There are, I believe, 3 plaintiffs. One is a trans boy and his family. The other is a medical provider, a doctor. And then there are 2 organizational plaintiffs, PFLAG National and GLAMA. So just a big thank you to all those folks. And Equality North Carolina was part of that in helping to organize folks and find plaintiffs. So this lawsuit right now is seeking to block the law from being enforced. If it's successful, providers will won't be banned from initiating this kind of care. And Equality North Carolina, along with our partners at Campaign for Southern Equality, will be monitoring with our providers that we're in partnership with to let folks know what's happening. So right now it's a little bit of confusion. Some providers are interpreting course of treatment very broadly, while others are interpreting it very narrowly. And some providers, because there's also a piece in there that extends the statute of limitations well beyond what the current malpractice remedies are, to I believe 25 years, and also the financial obligations if somebody was sued successfully. So some providers are just opting to not provide care at all. We've already seen at least 2 providers in the Greensboro area stop providing gender affirming care at all because of the fear of this law. So while we're waiting on that lawsuit, what can families of trans youth do right now? You can contact your medical provider to find out how they're interpreting the law. Even if your child is currently on a course of treatment, you still probably want to check in to see what that means. If they're on a medication, will they be able to switch medications or change dosages based on how your provider is interpreting the law? Planned Parenthood provides gender affirming care in North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia, and you can call or go to their website. They do have a gender affirming care navigator. They are limited though. They only provide for patients 16 and up, and the 16, 17-year-olds have to have parental consent, which is what we were doing before anyway. For other kids that are maybe younger than 16, and families of those kids, Campaign for Southern Equality has created the Southern Trans Youth Emergency Project. It offers a lot of different services, which I'm going to show you on the next slide. And just want to point out that second bullet there, that 85% of trans youth in the South live in states where anti-trans healthcare bills have passed. So these are the different services that the STIAP project offers: patient navigation, helping families to find medical providers, frontline grants, emergency grants. Families can get up to $500 to help support their needs to travel to receive care, and then the ecosystem of care. And this is the website here, and I think I have it linked on a slide later as well. So one thing folks can do is spread the word about the STIAP toolkit, and I do have it linked later, I believe, and it is available in Spanish and English. And this is just to give a wide lens look at what the landscape of gender affirming care it looks like in the United States. So the red states are where there's a ban in effect. The star is just where there's court rulings. And I will say, at least in Alabama and Georgia, the court rulings have gone back and forth. So the lower courts initiated a stay on the bans, and then the higher courts now have allowed the ban to go back into effect, at least in some parts. So the star doesn't mean that you can receive care there. It just means there's a current court battle, and now we'll have to add a star to North Carolina as well. So now we're going to move on to the next law I wanted to mention in North Carolina is SB 49. This is what we refer to as the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill, and this is impacting schools. So what it does is it censors education on gender identity or sexual orientation in grades K through 4. It also, one of the most harmful parts of this law, it mandates educators to report if a student requests folks to use a different name or pronouns at school. They have to report that to their parents. So that's basically forced outing. And sometimes that's not safe for the child if they haven't shared that information with their parents. There may be a good reason for that. It also changes some surveys from, they used to be where you could opt out of them, and now they're going to be opt in. So that means there'll be less, there will be less information because not everybody will remember to opt in. And also, families can view their students' library records, any books they checked out, anything like that. What it does not do, it does not prevent lesson plans on inclusion and respect. It doesn't prevent any instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in grades 5 through 12. So I've heard a couple of educators say grade 5 or 5th grade year is going to be the gayest year ever with all the students coming out. And I just think that's a beautiful picture. But it doesn't prevent schools from offering GSAs or other affirming spaces. GSA is just a different, depending on your school, it's maybe Gay Straight Alliance or it's just a LGBTQ affirming club space. And it may not be enforceable due to current legal battles and existing policy. And so with that, I've linked this memo here, but some of the folks at Campaign for Southern Equality, a couple of attorneys got together and wrote a legal memo that they published earlier this month, talking about how SB 49 violates Title IX, because Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, including gender, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And so this is obviously Title IX is a federal law, so it takes precedence over state law. And for school districts that comply with SB 49, they could be risking federal education funding by being in violation of Title IX. And so one of the things that folks can do is file Title IX complaints. Also for school staff that have a standards of professional conduct or ethics requirements like attorneys do, this law may ask them to violate those professional standards, and they may be at risk of losing their license or something along those lines if they comply. So Campaign for Southern Equality has all of these great resources at this resource hub that I've linked here. And Equality North Carolina is a partner with Campaign for Southern Equality. So all these resources have been jointly created, and we share them as a team. And then finally, I'm going to go over the last law. I want to talk about North Carolina HB 574, which is the anti-trans sports bill. So what this bill does is it applies to all public, private, and charter middle schools, high schools, and college sports, including intramural sports. It mandates that all sports be designated by, quote, biological sex. And I quote that because that is a seemingly simple term, and I guarantee you it is not, unless you're only going to look at what you learn in biology in 10th grade. But they have to be designated as male, men, or boys, or female, women, girls, or co-ed or mixed. It designates that a student's gender is whatever their sex was assigned at birth. Despite whatever their birth certificate may say, because in North Carolina, you can have your birth certificate updated. Even if you have an updated birth certificate, it still is going to assign your gender as what it was assigned at birth. And it explicitly prohibits trans girls from playing. It does not explicitly prevent, or doesn't explicitly say trans boys cannot play. What it does not do, besides that, is prevent students from playing on teams that align with their sex assigned at birth. So trans girls could play on teams designated boys, men, or male. And it, again, doesn't explicitly prohibit trans boys from participating on sports that align with their gender identity. And it has no impact on any teams that are unaffiliated with interscholastic organizations. And again, this may not be enforceable, again, due to current legal battles. There's a case at the Fourth Circuit now for a child in West Virginia, a trans girl that runs track. So we're still waiting on that. So what now with the sports bill? Well, compliance at the middle and high school level is going to be overseen by the State Board of Education, while compliance at the collegiate level will be overseen by the Board of Governors. And again, I just want to point out with those two first bullets, The North Carolina High School Athletic Association had already created an inclusive policy that was working, and there were less than 10 kids that had applied to play the sports in North Carolina. And out of those, 3 were trans girls, and out of those, only 1 application the child went through the whole process and was approved. 1 child did not finish the process, and 1 was not approved. And so we made a law based on 1 child. The college level, the NCAA also already had an inclusive policy that they were using. And so the state of North Carolina now has taken over this piece. Like, they have removed those 2, the High School Athletic Association and the NCAA's authority to oversee these issues that they had already dealt with. What you can do is encourage your school district to allow trans boys to continue to play, again, because that is not against that law. You can file Title IX complaints, and you can call for your city or town to pass non-discrimination ordinances if they don't already have one, to protect trans youth's ability to play on recreational teams. We're already seeing in some of our more conservative areas in the state where town halls or town councils are already starting to pass anti-trans sports bills to include any sports in that town or county. And then lastly, have those trans kids play away. Now, I say this with a note of caution. Trans kids are under attack. And so a person would really have to take stock in how they can manage this. I've linked here to Mac Beggs, who was a trans boy wrestler, was not allowed to wrestle on the boys team, so wrestled on the girls team and won, and like beat everybody. And so it would take a special kind of kid that was willing to undergo that kind of scrutiny and threats. And now that's been a few years ago. Now the threats are physical. We've seen bomb threats at the hospitals across the state that offer gender-affirming care. So you'd really have to take some stock into the risk level with doing that to play away. And then another map just to show the landscape of the anti-trans student sports bills across the country. So you can see it's all over. All right, and then lastly, we're going to talk about resources and next steps. So if you or someone you know experiences a denial of care or discrimination at school, or an inability to participate in school sports, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will connect them to the organization or person who is handling those matters. Equality North Carolina does not provide direct service, and we don't litigate, but we do work in close contact with our partner organizations like Lambda Legal and the ACLU of North Carolina that do litigate those issues. If you need support identifying gender-affirming healthcare, you can contact the SIAP program there, spread the word about SIAP. Get involved in your local school board. Encourage your district to actively support LGBTQ youth. Consider joining Public School Strong. I've linked it there if you're not familiar with that. That was a grassroots effort. It's one of the best I've seen in a long time. They're really trying to do a couple things. One is to have fully funded public schools in North Carolina, and to really create strong public schools in North Carolina. They also recognize that the new battleground is public school board meetings, and groups like Moms for Liberty, which have been designated as a terrorist group, are inundating our school boards and encouraging school boards or bullying school boards in some cases into passing really bad policies that hurt our public schools. So Public School Strong is trying to have their folks at all the school board meetings across all 115 school districts in North Carolina. I'm part of them, and go to our school board meetings, and you can give as little or as much time as you want. Follow Equality North Carolina social media for upcoming opportunities to mobilize. Update your voter registration. Make sure you have your ID to vote this year, and vote. Make sure you're voting in local elections. This year we're doing municipal elections. Make sure you're voting in those. They're just as important. And I know I'm probably speaking to the choir here, preaching to the choir here, but don't forget those judicial races. They're really important. And remind all the LGBTQ youth in your life that you love and support them, because they need to feel that now more than ever. And then some next steps from the Trevor Project survey on ways to support LGBTQ young people. You know, the queer youth report lower rates of attempted suicide when they've had access to affirming spaces. There's one statistic, I don't have it here represented, but trans youth in particular, just having one affirming person that uses their name and their pronouns correctly and just affirms who they are can lower that child's suicide rate down to the national average rather than a much higher 40%. It makes a big difference for a queer youth to have even one affirming person in their lives. And then if they have access to affirming homes and schools and communities and community events and spaces, then they have lower rates of attempting suicide. It's just a simple fact. So affirming a LGBTQ youth is a life-saving measure. Some other ways to have next steps or move on is to get involved with Equality North Carolina, and I've linked all of these. You can become a member, join a regional chapter group. We have them all across the state. Join our advocates network, become a sponsor, volunteer with us. We have volunteers do everything from table at Pride events to Canvas to you name it. So you can give as much or as little time as you have. Access and use our resources. You can request a speaker. We're looking for folks to join our PAC. Equality North Carolina is a C3, a C4, and a PAC. So you can join our PAC, join our board, and donate to ENC. And now I will entertain any questions. And I'm going to go ahead and show my contact information so then I can stop sharing my screen so I can see folks who might be asking any questions. And I'll open the chat so I can see if there's any there. So Atia says, are there other organizations that provide compassion, support, and education to parents of LGBTQ children to help them accept and learn how to provide gender-affirming care? So probably the most well-known is PFLAG, which has chapters all over the country and even internationally. And so you could just go to pflag.org and look for a chapter. There is a chapter, I believe, in the RDU area. There's a really active chapter in Charlotte. You don't have to live in Charlotte to participate with them. A lot of the PFLAG chapters do their support meetings online now since COVID, so you can be anywhere and still participate. Other than that, in North Carolina specifically, I'm part of a parent group called Transforming Families, and that's for family members of trans and non-binary, mostly kids, and they can be adult kids or young kids. But in there, we provide support, resources, depending on where folks are on the journey. We have people who just found out yesterday that their kid is trans or non-binary to people who have adult children who have been on this journey for decades. So it's a great place to get peer support and resources. There are people all over the state. So a lot of times you'll see questions about who's a good mental health provider in this area of the state, or where can I shop for this size shoe in this part of the state? Just a variety of ways to help each other out. I see that is the Vo versus Manfield in federal court. It's in the Middle District, yes. What is the current landscape of bathroom use in K-12 schools and in higher ed schools? Right now, bathrooms are, I think it's there's not any law or anything right now HB2's been not fully rescinded, but mostly. But I think it just depends on the school. For instance, at Maddie's current school, it's just an individual issue that they work out with the student if there is an issue at all. And then in higher ed, I'm not sure. I know at one point, not about bathrooms, but in terms of like dorm, like housing and things like that, there was it wasn't as inclusive as it could be in the UNC system. I don't know if that has changed. I doubt that it has. Can you talk a little bit about mental health professionals and how North Carolina laws may affect how they work with youth who may be questioning their gender identity or identify as trans, including school counselors? So mental health professionals in general are not covered under HB 808, but under SB 49, school counselors are. So part of that law also says something, and excuse me for messing up the language of it, but it's basically saying that adults can't encourage students to withhold information from their parents. So like if you have a student who comes to you as a school counselor and says, I think I might be gay, or I think I might be trans, or I'm questioning this, and they say, I'm afraid to say anything to my parents because I'm afraid they're going to kick me out, or I'm afraid that, like maybe there's a history of abuse or something like that. The adult is not permitted to encourage the student to keep that from their parent. However, you can see where that would conflict with mandatory reporting, and also like just as a mental health professionals, you're not trying to put a child in danger. That's against your profession. And so you can see where it's a tricky situation. And that's where the legal memo talks about that. And also that's where we have been encouraging folks to join whatever their statewide professional organization is. So like the North Carolina Educators Association, who provides litigation support for teachers who may get dinged for not complying with this law. So for mental health providers, joining whatever association that is for you, for those folks that has that same sort of support. But yeah, it's tricky, like it goes against your professional ethics to, put a child at risk. Let me see, there it is. Okay. For teachers who are morally opposed to reporting about a child's change in pronouns to child's parents, what resources are for them? Again, joining the NCAE, but also we've had a lot of discussions, and I didn't include all of that in here, but I would highly recommend, if you all see any of our town halls coming up or our educators workshops, we talk a lot in there about people share ideas and things they're doing at their schools. So for instance, for this particular one, a teacher said they're just going to start calling all their students by their last names. So then that's just going to prevent them from having to talk about anybody else's names. And somebody else pointed out that actually would be beneficial to other students who may be in the foster care system as well. And so that there's, it might just be beneficial overall. So that was one suggestion. Another suggestion from a teacher who runs a QSA at their school is they were not going to have people say why they were there. They were just going to say it's just for everybody, and anybody could come, and you don't have to say whatever your identity is when you come there, just everybody come. Another suggestion, this doesn't answer your question, but for instance, on the library part, one school librarian said the way they do checkouts was the kids would sign the books out, and they're just getting rid of the sign out sheet. And if they lose some books, fine, but then they just don't have a record of who checked out what book. So because the law doesn't allow the teachers to use materials that talk about sexual orientation or gender identity, in K through 4 grades in the curriculum. So what I'm talking about there is, like, say you're doing a project on family trees. You couldn't share a book about families that don't have, how do you do that without talking about sexual orientation? If you're going to talk about a family tree, how do you talk about parents, whether they're a mom and a dad parent, or two dad parents, or two mom parents, or a mom and a trans parent? Like, how do you do that without talking about sexual orientation very loosely? And that's the only way people would do that in K through 4 anyway. So like things like that are coming up. And then I haven't even mentioned in here about LGBTQ teachers and staff and faculty, and their ability to even share about themselves in school. One good thing in the bill is that they can talk about it if the student initiates the conversation. So that is one good thing. Are there any new bills targeting trans kids on the horizon? The original text of the bills that passed went much further than the final statutes enacted, and some legislators going to try to get the other provisions that were cut out of those laws enacted. I foresee, I catastrophize. That's just me, and so I'm always looking at the worst case scenario on the horizon. I'm also looking at other states like Kansas, Florida, Texas. So we've seen some of the most horrible atrocities in those states. So for instance, I'm thinking about, states that have won't let you cross state borders to receive medical care. We talked about that. Trans adults are being attacked. Trans adults' ability to access healthcare is being attacked. There are states that are trying to prevent adults from accessing those medications. So you can see the legal arguments here. So if say I'm a trans person, a trans woman trying to access estrogen, and I'm not allowed in my state as an adult, I'm not allowed in my state, but my friend here, who is a cis woman and isn't going through menopause and wants to access estrogen for menopause symptoms, is allowed to access it. How is that even a thing? Like, why are we even doing this? Like, it doesn't, yeah. So you can see there's a lot, but yeah, I'm looking for all the bad stuff. I'm looking for bathroom bills. I'm looking for bills against adults. I'm looking for, in Kansas, they're trying to make people who've had legal name changes and gender marker corrections to revert back to their former names, and things like that. So yeah, I'm expecting all the bad stuff. And then we have a huge election next year. And then, there are definitely people on the ballot who have had very public, very passionate, very negative opinions of the LGBTQ community. And so that's really scary. Please share contact information for Transforming Families. You can email me. I'll put my email. It's a closed private group for safety reasons. And so you have to be invited by a member. But you can email me and I can get you connected to the folks that run it. As you can imagine, there's a lot of safety issues. What is the current state of OCR's approach to investigating Title IX complaints by transgender K through 12 students? I don't know for sure. We did have, I was on a webinar recently with someone from the OCR office. And, so far, all that we've been able to share with folks is that, don't expect it to be a quick process, and it's better than it was under the last administration. The last administration had mentioned that they were not going to investigate any OCR complaints around gender identity issues. This current administration will, but it's not a quick process. Campaign for Southern Equality is specifically taking up the heavy lift of actually helping people walk through making those OCR complaints. So if you know somebody who wants to do that, you can reach out to Campaign for Southern Equality, or, that was my personal email. You can email me there, but it'll get lost in about 1,000 emails. So let me put my work one here. But you can email me and I can make sure you get to the right folks at Campaign for Southern Equality. Does anybody else have any other questions, or anybody that asked a question want me to clarify anything? And just for just so that you know, you may not have ever met somebody that had a trans kid before, so I might be the first person you've met with a trans kid. So my kid is not impacted by the health care bill so far as it currently stands. She is impacted by the sports ban. She had intended to play softball this year and will not be able to do that. She is a varsity cheerleader, but that's considered a co-ed sport, so that doesn't impact her. And then because she's in high school, most of the and because we have done a legal name change, most of that does not impact her. But we have seen across the state, you know, hostile teachers and administrators and that kind of thing over comply with the bill already, even though the deadline now has been moved to January 1st, to correspond with the state budget. We've already seen, for instance, there's a teacher in a Wake County school that before their school even had set a policy or anything else, started notifying parents of names and pronouns immediately, even to affirming parents. And it, you know, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see overcompliance, and then we're going to see a chilling effect, as I mentioned, like in the medical field, where people are just similar to abortion, where it's just going to become too much to try to offer the care. Let me see that. I think so school counselors don't have to report to parents about use of, you know, you have to, school counselors need to assess their own risk as to what they will do or won't do. Again, I would reach out to whoever their professional organization is and see what their guidance is, especially if they offer litigation support. If a school counselor if there was a complaint lodged against a school counselor under this. Right now, this law is not going to be enforced until after January 1. The DPI folks went up and lobbied and said, you know, there's no way we can get all this together by the original implementation date was September 15th. So it did go so that now it is not in effect until January 1. Now school boards and districts can be working on their policies, can go ahead and implement policies, but there won't be an enforcement mechanism at least until January 1. But yeah, that would be my best information there on school counselors. You know, I can't, obviously I can't encourage anybody to break the law. You have to just assess the risk, look at what your ethics say, and then make that determination. And then I would also encourage you to reach out again to your professional organization. You may have mentioned this: in which states is gender affirming care available for youth? There are a few states that have become sanctuary states, and there's some cities or towns in states that have become sanctuary cities or towns, and some are just by executive order. So it could change with an election cycle. So for instance, I don't have them all memorized, but for instance, you can still, Illinois is a affirming state, New York, California for the most part, although they do have a bad bill that they have introduced this year. Delaware just became a sanctuary state. Maryland's in a sanctuary state. DC is a sanctuary city. So there are a variety. And right now, for North Carolina, for folks trying to access care, you can still legally get care in Virginia, and South Carolina and West Virginia are the closest states to us. That probably won't be forever in those states, but you can still access care right now. TCA represents children whose gender identity or sexual orientation is an area of conflict in a custody case where we serve children in Wake and Durham. Yes. Yes. Any other questions, or can I clarify more? I feel like I'm not really clarifying the mental health school counselor's question as well as I could. Costs, insurance providers that are supportive and pay for care. It depends on your insurance, obviously, but for instance, for us, the clinic where Maddie goes is considered a specialty clinic. She's on the state employees health plan. I believe our copay is $80 to every visit. She goes every 6 months. And then, and right now that will remain until that Cadle case gets finalized whenever that happens. If you pay out of pocket, it is exorbitant, as you can imagine. I think Maddie's prescriptions are like $5 or something like that every time, which is not bad at all. And I'm not sure with what out of pocket would be. The STIAP program does have those grants to help cover some costs. There's also the Trans Lifeline. It has micro grants for different things. And then I'll put another one in here. And then gender bands. I used to be on their board. They offer grants, yearly grants. They'll probably start doing applications. They usually start doing applications in November, and then the grant starts in the following year. And they just added like identity documents to this. So like if you need money to help you get your name changed, you can do a grant from then. And Trans Lifeline also does grants for identity documents, but Gender Bands also does different healthcare grants, including even surgery grants for adults. So those are some of the places that you can go to. Any other questions?
Katie, as far as notifying the parent about a child who wants to use a different name or pronoun, does that only apply up to grade 4?
No, I believe that is K through 12.
Okay.
The teacher that I mentioned in Wake County Schools, that was a middle school student. So yes. Mm-hmm. And you know, some creative compliance on this is like thinking about, okay, well, there was a student, for instance, who said, okay, I have 7 different classes. I change classes 7 times a day. So every class I go into, I'm going to change my name a little bit. So in my first class, I'm going to be Joseph. In my second class, I'm going to be Joe. In my third class, I'm going to be Joey. In my next class, I'm going to be Jay, you know, like that. And so they have to be notified for all those different, you know, because that's a different name, you know, and that is creative. I just hate the burden that it puts on teachers, because I feel like this is just another layer of hostility placed on teachers that would, if it were me, would make me not ever want to be a teacher. Along with everything else, now you have, and the thing about SB 49, with a lot of the like parent notification pieces, all of that was already available. It was already available for you to go and talk to your teacher about their lesson plans and all of that stuff. And now they're just making everything like you have to have it all written out for the whole year, viewable, you know, early on. It's just making it really a burden for our teachers. And so I hate that idea on that piece, but it makes sense. I heard another student say that on the first day of school, their whole class was just going to all come out as transgender. So then everybody is just transgender to help any kids that it might be unsafe. And I think for most parents, you know, even if your kid wasn't ready to tell you, you'd be okay with that. You know, they'll tell you when they're ready. You know, I don't know. For me, like, I remember my English teacher in high school was like the person that I went to if I had problems and stuff. Well, queer kids do that all the time. They have like a special teacher that they talk to. And I would hope, you know, most parents can see that all our kids, it's helpful to have another adult that our kids can talk to about things when they don't feel like they're ready to talk to us. It's not like some kind of malicious thing. It takes a village. It really does. Like, I mean, if my kids only had to depend on me, I mean, they'd be in trouble now, because I don't know. I mean, you know, that's why I sent them to preschool, because I was like, there's no way you'll be ready for kindergarten if it's up to me. So, you know, I don't know. I don't get it, but yeah. And then I was at a lot of these legislative sessions, and the whole argument for the school bill was parents need to be involved. Parents have rights. Parents need to make these decisions. But then the whole argument in the healthcare bill was parents don't have the right to make these decisions. So it's really, I remember in one of the senators was like, pointed that out and was like, I wish we'd just pick a lane. because yeah, it was really confusing to think I have all these rights in one meeting and then I have no rights in the other to make personal, private healthcare decisions for my child. So yeah, it's really interesting. But
And I just wanted to clarify, I think you said that if a child is currently or had been receiving health care prior to August 1st, they can continue that. Is that correct?
yes, and it depends on their provider as to what that means. So, for instance, a provider might say, okay, this child has a blocker, and so that's their course of treatment. And once we're no longer needing the blocker, you can't move on to another medication because that's not the same course of treatment. Where another provider might say, no, a blocker and then moving on to hormones is all part of the same course of treatment. So it really depends on the provider, which is why we're encouraging folks to reach out to their individual providers to find out how they're interpreting the law, instead of just assuming what they're going to do, in case you need to make plans based on how they're interpreting it. And some are interpreting it very broadly, which is helpful to the kids, and some are more narrow because their risk assessment is different, and I can respect that. And that's why we are trying to really push out the STIAP program to help folks and they'll help you identify care in your state, in North Carolina too. If your kid did receive some sort of care before August 1st, it's not just for care outside of North Carolina.
Okay. Thank you. It's a little after 1. So Katie, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. This has been so informative, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time to be here with us. And everyone out there, if there are any other topics that you would like for us to have a speaker, please let us know, because we really want to serve you here at the JJCR section. I think that's all, unless anyone else wanted to make a closing comment. Okay, well, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Suzanne.
No, I just wanted to emphasize our thanks to Katie. You are such a terrific advocate for this population, and thank you so much for this wealth of information and resources. It's really fantastic.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.